Just a quick reminder that if you want to support Concepts and Legends, please remember to like and subscribe. And you can also show your support by using our TCG affiliate link for any and all of your Magic needs by using the link you see here or below in the description. Any and all help is greatly appreciated and helps us bring you more videos like the one that is starting right now. MTG artist, New York Times bestselling author whose book was adapted by Dreamworks, illustrator for Neil Gaiman. These are just some of the career highlights of Adam Rex, today's interview. You gotta hear it to believe it. So thank you so much for taking time with me today to answer some questions.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I read that you were an undergraduate when you started illustrating for Magic?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that's right. This was a long time ago. So, you're asking me to turn back the clock quite a bit, but I was an undergrad and I was taking work out to the San Diego Comic-Con every year to show it around. So that's where I got hooked up with both Wizards of the Coast and TSR back when they were separate entities. And so I want to say this was probably like 94 or so that maybe I started doing some work. This was not Magic the Gathering yet, but maybe starting in about 94, I worked on a game that Wizards was making at the time called Ars Magica, and maybe started to do a little bit of D&D stuff as well. And probably around 95 or 96 is when the person who was overseeing Magic at the time noticed me and got in touch.
You must have been one of the youngest artists that was working there at this time.
I don't even know the answer to that question because I wasn't meeting anybody back then. So I wasn't 18 or anything. I think probably I was probably like 20 or 21 when I started getting work in my field, and then I was still an undergrad for some time after that because I started taking so much time to do paid work that I had to go part-time as a student. So I got to say that I was an undergrad working for Wizards of the Coast for probably a couple years longer than I should have done in the first place. But
you're spinning it as though it's not impressive. I mean, like, if I looking back at what I was doing when I was 21.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So when you basically Magic had been a good springboard for you to get into illustration for children's books, which was that what you had planned all along? And what were you studying when you were doing your undergraduate?
So I was studying illustration and a good deal of graphic design as well, because that's just how the major was set up at my school, which was the University of Arizona here in Tucson. And I really did want to do kids' books, maybe some comics as well. I liked working for Magic and I liked working for D&D and the other games that I did do work for. I would actually say that none of these were terribly good springboards into children's book illustration. As it turned out, the people who publish kids' books get enough work sent to them that is exactly what they need to see. They don't really care that you're making a living doing Magic the Gathering cards if what they're really looking for is somebody to illustrate a book about a bear who learns how to share or whatever. So they looked at my portfolio, which was heavily, orcs with axes and that kind of thing, and that was not what they needed to see. So I kind of had to propagate a completely separate portfolio at the time of just spec work so that I could try to get into kids' books, which I was also trying to write at the time, and just basically studying and getting ready to enter into. But that took a number of years. I was trying to get into children's books for 6 or 7 years before I finally got a break.
And so would you say that your like natural inclination as an artist, because I look at, like, for instance, the piece behind me that I actually voted in one of the scariest, the top 10 scariest magic arts of all time in one of my videos. It's epic. It's like it really looks like a Renaissance style painting. it's so terrifying. Do you think that your style is more organically darker, which a lot of the magic stuff you did was just terrifying stuff, or do you think that you are more light and like lighthearted the way you are with children's illustration?
I think I'm more lighthearted and more so as I get older. I think that my children's book inclinations and my magic card inclinations were a little closer together back in the beginning. I don't know how familiar you are with children's books, but I did like some of the kind of darker looking stuff. Some of Maurice Sendak's darker work, or Lane Smith, or Peter Cease. I've never known how to say his last name,
Right.
but uh, they were making stuff that was a little more eerie, and I liked that. But I think the older I get, the more I want to make stuff that's sweet without saccharine, being saccharine, and try to find that like nice line between being between a little bit dark but cute at the same time. Uh, I think what you're responding to is that I feel like I always understand the assignment. And so even though during my magic years, I was constantly asking, can you please give me some like funny goblins to do? Or I'm trying to get into kids' books. Can you give me some angels and goblins and stuff like that? And the art director at the time would always say, oh, yeah, sure. The next time we'll do that. And then the next time would come around and they would give me 4 zombies to do once again. So I never tried to make my zombie cards look funny or sweet or cute, because that wasn't the assignment, and I always wanted to do the best I could by whatever I was being asked to accomplish, even if that meant that none of my work from that period could go in my kids book portfolio. And in fact, if I had tried to show some of my magic cards in a sit down meeting with an editor or art director at a children's book publisher, I probably would have been escorted out by security. But
Oh, right.
that one
Yeah.
behind you, I really did enjoy painting that, because I love. I used to teach figure drawing. I love painting figures, and I love anatomy. And I was really into this artist named Odd Nerdrum at
Hmm.
the time. So Odd Nerdrum is not somebody you would know from magic or any gaming art, but he's I think a Dutch painter who does these very stark, eerie, you know, allegorical and kind of apocalyptic kind of landscapes with figures in them, and so honestly, Terror behind you was kind of my homage to him.
I mean, I don't know what it is. It's something about not just it's sort of like taking the circle of life and making it into this like grotesque mockery, and it's also this. I mean, you can't see it, that sun in the center. What is it about that that makes it so awful? It implies, I guess, that the sun is setting. It's so good. I hate to gush over it, but I can't help it.
No, I appreciate it. Like I said, even though it's not the kind of work that I want to be regularly asked to do for a living, I'm still super proud of that one. I think it's one of the better magic cards I ever did, and I did kind of exactly what I wanted to do with it, which is not something I can always say about an illustration.
Was the brief something that was specified, this sort of thing happening, or were you given creative freedom to do that?
I want to say that it was pretty specific, actually, that it was an unending, tortuous, uh, phenomenon happening to somebody where they were constantly, you know, essentially like, vomiting up their own musculature, which is vomiting up the skeleton, which is eating the, and just this, awful snake eating its tail of their own anatomy, that I think it was supposed to imply that it was just going on forever, that this person was receiving just about the worst punishment that somebody could receive. And I think that was pretty, they didn't give me a brief about what in particular the figure was supposed to look like, but I kept the figure fairly simple because I didn't want to bog the thing down with, you know, a lot of detail and giant, pauldrons and buckles everywhere, and take away from just the stark anatomical horror of the situation.
Right, just giving it sort of an everyman sort of feel makes it even more terrifying.
I wanted his body to look like it was sort of crumpling, as there was nothing inside of it to hold it, uh, you know, to flesh it out anymore. So, I did make the guy shirtless so that you could kind of see his body sort of caving in on itself in a way that you wouldn't have been able to if he was wearing some giant breastplate or something like that.
Do the assignments when they're that, because you strike me as somebody who is a very very in touch with emotion. You have to be as a children's author, and it's you have to be aware of it. Does that kind of assignment stick with you and like sort of get into your head?
I think this one did a little bit. I think this one was the painting I did that unsettled me more than any other painting I'd done. I'd done a lot of zombies over the years, but um, I don't know, something about this is obviously a fantastical situation, but it was also a little more grounded than, for example, what was that one? Graveyard Sovereign, I think,
Hmm. Hmm.
where it was essentially like a giant zombie throwing up a
Yeah,
smaller zombie. I
yeah.
can't really connect with that on a personal level, but but this one, had more of a body horror and a Cronenbergian kind of way that I feel like hit me in the gut even as I was painting it more than any of my others.
Yeah, I had a grade school teacher that told me that when I was 12 that I was going to go to hell for being Jewish. So anything that has an eternal damnation thing to it, it freaks me out. Freaks me out.
Well, you could say, "Jokes on you." The Jews don't have hell, right? So, uh,
She probably wouldn't have taken it so well. She was not a happy lady, I don't think, because
yeah,
her expression was usually
yeah.
so. But so then when did the shift to happen for the career as the children's author? When did you sort of break through? What was the event that led to that?
It was a kind of a. It's hard to break it down to a singular event, but I kind of decided even when I was a teenager, I was working after school at a Walden Books, which
Oh, I
I don't
remember
know if you
those.
remember those,
I
but yeah,
do. I remember bookstores. They
yeah,
were cool.
yeah. There's only, I mean, as far as the big chains out west where I am, are I think only Barnes and Noble is left, but
Yeah.
I worked at a Walden Books after school in high school, and it was a very not busy Walden Books. So I had a lot of time to just wander around and look at stuff. And I kept on ending up back in the children's book section just to look at the stories and art. And I kind of fell in love with children's books all over again. I was always into comics as well. So I sort of decided at the age of 16 or so that I was going to do comics or kids books when I got older. And and so I started trying to write my own, and it took me a number of years just to figure out how to do that. I wrote a lot of really bad picture books on my road to figuring out what was so bad about them and getting to a better place. But I, starting in school when I was again like probably 20 or 21, I started sending work out to the kids book publishers, mostly in New York, and getting a lot of nice rejection letters, but that was it. My first work for children was more in the magazine field, where I don't know if you remember Cricket Magazine or
Hmm.
Spider Magazine,
Yeah.
all the magazines named after bugs. I were all owned by the same company: Cricket, Ladybug, Babybug, Spider, Cicada, and I did work for just about all of those. So that was a nice way to. I was being paid a pittance, but I was getting paid something to sort of refresh my portfolio every now and then.
Right. And now you
And
can say you can professionally claim you as a professional. Because my ideas are, if you have to declare it on your taxes, then you're a pro.
yeah, and I think that helps ease the concerns of a picture book editor. It's always a little bit of a leap of faith for any picture book editor to give a picture book to somebody who's never done one professionally before, because that is 32 to 48 or more pages of art. And it's a lot of work. And if you give that to somebody who's never done a picture book, I imagine every editor probably has some horror story of somebody who just bails out
Oh
halfway
my
through
gosh.
because it's too much to handle. So just any kind of understanding that I had been working professionally for a little while. In that sense, probably working for Magic had helped me to some degree, and working for the children's magazines and D&D and all the rest. And then after, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of writing my own stories and sending them out, and also sending portfolios out, hoping to be able to work on other people's stories. Like I my then girlfriend, now wife, was hunting grad schools in the East. So I went with her and decided to try to meet somebody who had been nicer to me than most in his letters back to me. So this would have been, we went out there in 2001, early 2001, and I met with a guy at Farrar, Straus and Giroux, a publisher in New York. He met with me. I feel like he felt so bad that I had come 2,000 miles to see him that he gave me a manuscript and asked me to do a tryout piece for it. And that turned out to be my first children's book. It was called The Dirty Cowboy. It was written by Amy Timberlake. And that one came out in 2003. So that was my first work as a children's book illustrator.
And then that was, I would say, I'm also going to say fortunate enough to create controversy, which I, for is that something that people don't understand about what it is to be a children's author? Because it seems like you guys are being like put in the position of being blamed for being indecent, when it's just, in my opinion, it's nonsense. But did that help, like, sort of bring you into the forefront?
It probably didn't hurt. I mean, it kind of helps and hurts at the same time, in my opinion. I know a lot of people wear it as a badge of honor to have been censored or banned in any extent. That book, I guess I should explain, was a book about a cowboy who only takes one bath a year, and so in the course of the story, he takes his clothes off and gets into the river and bathes. I never actually show anything. There's always plants or a dog's tail or something in the way. It ends up being, intentionally ridiculous, that there's always something, a low flying bird, always something that happens to get between you, the viewer, and any actual indecency. But it
I
still
mean,
bothered some people.
and
And
it's there's nothing indecent about nudity in the first place, which is in my opinion. But I'm sorry, but go on.
yeah, I mean, I tend to agree, but I also think that people, I don't know, I think something happens to you when you're a parent, and my experience being a parent kind of makes me sympathetic, where you get so much more concerned about the psychic well-being of your children than you ever thought anybody should be worried about you as a child. And you become, every parent ends up being some kind of a hypocrite, I think, at some point, where they say, well, I can't let you do that thing that I used to happily do, when I was a child, because, suddenly on the outside looking in, it seems horrific to me. I I can't think of any books that have ever caused me to have that reaction with my son, but nonetheless, I get why people have sort of knee-jerk reactions to things, and sometimes those knee-jerk reactions turn into very well publicized book bannings, where an entire school district decides to remove a book, and then the ACLU finds out about it, and then it becomes a national story in a way that can only help me, sales wise.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Streisand effect that people talk about, where surely hundreds of people ended up looking at my book that would not otherwise have done so. It didn't cause anybody to not look at my book. But at the core of it, also there's somebody out there who's saying that I and my work is bad for children, and that can't help but hurt me personally, even if I disagree. Because
That's
all I'm trying to do, my whole life's work is I'm trying to make good books for kids. And to have somebody in that stark a manner say, no, actually, you're bad for kids, is, that just sucks. And no amount of sales boost or backslapping from other authors, welcome to the club. It doesn't really, in my mind anyway, it doesn't ever really, compensate for the fact that somebody out there feels that way about you.
That's a shame. I mean, that, I never thought about it that way, but to be kind of having that thrown on you, and sort of like, that is a heavy burden. And for the record, for everyone listening, the equation that this person made was that they said that because somebody would be naked in a book, that means that pornography is okay. That's the jump that they made, which is frankly wackadoodle like territory. But
Yeah, if we're talking about the same case, I enjoyed the ACLU's counter argument where they were talking about the, um, like the children's first Bible kind of books out there, um, illustrated Bible stories that
oh yeah,
all have some depiction of Adam and Eve with the exact same. Isn't it funny how there's a branch that just happens to be in the way, or
right.
Eve's hair falling down? It's literally the exact same device. Or they brought up the famous Norman Rockwell painting No Swimming, where there's a
Hmm.
bunch of boys being chased out of a swimming hole who are holding their clothes over them as they're trying to get away. you know it just it it ends up, I think, really kind of just underlining that everybody kind of has situational ethics when it comes to that kind of thing. And the same person who never would have thought twice about an illustration of Adam and Eve was, without probably really thinking about it much at all, objecting to the exact same illustrative device in my book.
It's interesting how sometimes people can sort of, that's interesting that that can happen with certain things like religion, where one thing's fine and another thing isn't. But I don't want to get too political about that. That's just my thoughts on the subject. But
Sure.
um, I do think that that's pretty awesome that the National Coalition of Censorship stepped into and and really wrote a great letter on your behalf. Like it struck me as important people I've noticed, as far as authors go. A lot of really important people have gotten banned. I mean, it's never, you never hear a mediocre person getting banned. You know what I mean?
Well, you just don't hear about them, right? But
Exactly. Yeah.
I think what bothers me is that it was nice that that was a well publicized case, despite the hit that I take to my psyche, having to hear about it. But I know that for every time that there's a well publicized case of censorship, there's probably 12 that you never hear about because
Mm.
a parent complains, and the school steps in some fashion and quietly removes the book, and the community never learns what was done in their name, just because one parent, maybe in 10,000 or 100,000 or more, said something to the right person, then suddenly the book is gone, and the rest of the community doesn't even know that that's happened. So it's
Yeah.
actually, in that sense, it's nice when they're publicized, because then again, it only leads to people looking at your book and talking about it, and having the discussion that a community ought to be having every time this happens, rather than just the quiet, the book's out of here and that's it.
Um, what was it like to find out that one of your books was going to be made into an animated film? What was it like when you got that call?
It was a weird, slow process, where that book that you're talking about was my first novel, and it came out in 2007. And it might have been late 2007 or early 2008 that I learned that Dreamworks wanted to option it. But it was another 4 years or so after that before I was even sure that they were actually going to make it into a movie, because Dreamworks options a lot of things that don't end up going anywhere. I saw plenty of them over the years in their offices. They'd have me out there to see what they were doing, and I would see all this stuff up on the walls of these. Oh man, that movie is going to be so great. And then a couple years later, I realized, wait, that movie never happened. And I
Mm.
go and I look into it, and yeah, it just quietly died because it was one of the ones that didn't make it. So I got I got very lucky that my number came up, and they actually decided to go all the way with mine. And and yet it was a process of several years of just, phone calls and wondering if it was going to happen and keeping my fingers crossed, and then finding out it was going to happen, and then being told of, casting choices, and finding out that they were going to change the title of my book so that, you know when it came down to it, nobody was ever going to actually figure out that my book had anything to do with the movie, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, I guess
But still, it was, it was a fun process, and I'd do it again. But it it wasn't the, I think a lot of people assume that it was probably kind of a whirlwind, and it was anything but, just because of the glacial pace of animation. They were working on that concept to one degree or another for 8 years before it came out.
wow. Um,
Yeah.
what what was it like when you got the chance to make the book with Neil Gaiman? I mean, somebody who loves graphic novels. You had to have known about him, and that must have been a surreal experience.
Yeah, I started reading his stuff in maybe 1991 or 1992, and quickly became hooked. And he you know, swiftly became one of my favorite authors. So hearing from my agent that he was interested in having me illustrate a picture book with him was overwhelming. And then I learned that he wanted to call me and read the picture book to me himself, so I
Oh
could decide
wow.
whether or not I was going to do it. And I was like, yeah, like, I'm not going to do it. But
Right, right.
I
No
mean,
thanks, Neil. I have other things happening.
it would have to have been deeply offensive for me to have turned it down. And, why would that have been? So he
Yeah,
called me up and read it to me. And I was like, yes, please, I would love to do this. And that led to the two of us doing 3 books together about the same character. A cute little panda bear who sneezes, and his sneezes cause catastrophic effects in his community. But, cute panda bear who sneezes is definitely not in the top 10 things of what people think about when they think about Neil Gaiman.
right.
But nonetheless, it was a great experience.
It's interesting. I thought about the parallels between you and Neil as far as you both kind of were, you dabbled, you have stuff that's very much on one dark side of the spectrum and then another on the light side of the spectrum. It's interesting, and it makes sense that he approached you because I'm sure he was aware of you as a magic artist, and there's some sort of like synchronicity happening there, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why it was, except I think I had the good fortune to, he and I were represented by the same agency. Not the same agent, but the same agency. So I think when his agent was casting about trying to figure out who might uh, be a good cute panda artist, she got in touch with my agent, and I was one of the people that he pitched. And I had already had some funny animal stuff in my portfolio, so that was fortunate as well. It was amazing to me because, you know Neil Gaiman probably knows more illustrators than I do. Probably knows personally more illustrators than I do, but he probably also understood on some level that maybe this cute panda book was not the kind of thing to go to Dave McKeon for, or Kent Williams, or John J. Muth, or maybe Jill Thompson would have been good for. But anyway, one of these days maybe I'll ask him exactly how it happened. I have not wanted to look that gift horse in the mouth, but
Yeah, yeah. It's like sort of like I don't want to, press you on on something like that.
right.
It's awesome, and so I mean, and I'm assuming he is as cool as he seems.
Yeah, he's great. He and I had to. I mean, this is probably how all of his book signings go, but my biggest book signing ever was the one that we did together in a place called Books of Wonder in Midtown Manhattan. That it was something like 14 hours. It was the kind of thing that they had to actually have, staggered tickets for. They weren't charging for people to come in, but they couldn't have all the people that wanted to meet Neil Gaiman in the bookstore at the same time. So you were given a pass and said, come back at 2:30, and most of the people left and kept coming through the store all throughout the day, and it was just this marathon of signing and doing little drawings, and being able to watch how his fans interacted with him. Um, you know, I'm not I hope that people will understand that I'm not complaining, that I don't have fans that break down crying when they meet me, but I don't have fans who break down crying when they meet me, and Neil Gaiman does, and that was really something to watch. Just understanding how much his work is meant to so many people, and understanding that to some degree because his work has meant a lot to me too.
That's awesome. I mean, like, and I mean, it's still cool. I mean, the fact that you're there with somebody, it speaks volumes about the quality of an artist that you are. And now I think that it's even cooler that you are sort of you're sort of continuing with that sort of like taking on a new mentor or a mentoree, mentoring somebody with Christian Robinson. Um,
Oh,
was that
I wouldn't say that I'm mentoring Christian Robinson in any way. He's already a master of the art form. But if you mean that I'm now writing books that I don't illustrate, I
yeah.
do that. Now I seem to do that about as often as I write books that I do illustrate, or even that I illustrate books that I didn't write. I'm just kind of playing all sides of it.
What are the books right now, as far as young adults, that you recommend as like necessary reading?
Oh gosh, in the young adult arena, I really loved the Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I think I'm not probably not going to introduce too many people to that one. It's a very well known book, but I thought it's very much the book for this moment in time. Um, and I really like Jacqueline Woodson's work. Her Brown Girl Dreaming is a really lovely book written in verse, which is not something I've ever tried to do. Um, and then, gosh, what am I reading as far as middle grade books right now? I'm sort of, I've been kind of all over the place lately, reading comics and nonfiction and a little of everything. So it's kind of hard to remember what.
I mean,
Uh,
if it's anything, I guess any book that you're reading, because I'm fascinated to know what good writers are listening to or reading. I say listening to because most of my time I'm doing Audible because I'm a Audible junkie.
yeah, I like to listen to books as well, although I haven't been doing any of that lately because for the past year I've been a part-time third grade teaching assistant just by necessity because my son is home doing the distance learning.
Okay,
So
gotcha. Yeah,
pretty much
that's tough.
my usual day where I'd be listening to podcasts or NPR or listening to an audiobook while I work. Now I'm listening to my kids, third grade humanities class and math class and trying to keep them on task with that. So I kind of dropped off with a lot of the listening that I've been doing, but um, right now in the afternoon, his mom takes over. She teaches in the morning and then she comes home and does afternoon classes with him. So that's why I'm able to have the time to speak with you because I'm off the clock now.
Well, I really do appreciate it, and I won't keep you much longer because I want to give you your free time. But
For sure.
uh, like I guess the one question, the thing that I saw fascinating about your on your blog is that you went to Frida Kahlo's studio.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Who would be painters that you list as the ones that inspired you?
Oh, good question. I mentioned Odd Nerdrum earlier, even though
Mm-hmm.
he inspired me to make maybe my favorite magic card ever, but he doesn't really creep into my children's book work all that much. But I really love John Singer Sargent and Joaquin Sorolla. I'm a fan of a lot of 19th century, kind of late 19th century painting, Whistler. But then when it comes to stuff within my own field, I get really excited by. Strangely, I get excited by people whose work doesn't look very much like mine, and I haven't really done a full investigation as to why that is. Like maybe it means I should be doing something differently. But I really love Carson Ellis. She is a author and illustrator who does beautiful stuff. One of my favorite picture books of the last 20 years is a picture book she wrote and illustrated called Do Is Talk. And if you don't understand what that means, that's fine, because it's bug language, it's insect language.
Okay. Okay.
You're not expected to understand it, but the entire book is written in bug language.
Hmm.
It's all these sort of tableaus of all these insects um, interacting and trying to figure out what things are. And the amazing thing about it is, by the end of the book, you kind of understand bug language too. And with repeated readings, you figure out everything that they're saying on every page. You kind of pick it up by context.
Wow.
And I love Isabel Arsenault, or Arsenault. Too many people whose name pronunciations I've never had to say out loud before.
It
So I'm
it
not
is
sure.
so it's so hard with a lot of people, especially like the artists. Like, and they don't do a lot of interviews, so there's nowhere that you can hear their name pronounced. And
There is a place, I should look it up, because there is actually a great website for children's book authors and illustrators, where they, as soon as they hear about you, they ask you to send them an audio file of you pronouncing your name, and they just put them all on, just so that like librarians and teachers can learn what
that
everybody's name is like. But
that's brilliant. That's
and
brilliant.
it's a fantastic resource, but it's one that I think pretty much is just children's books, so it doesn't help you figure out how to say Donato Giancola or
Maybe
Tony DiLisi or whatever. But
I'll start one of my own. I tell you this much. I mean, like, I can't tell you how many interviews I start off first by saying, "Okay, how do I pronounce your name?"
yeah, I think you ought to, honestly. Like, that would probably end up being a valuable resource to more people than you realize.
Well, I'm gonna do it now. I'm set in stone. My last question is: do you ever see yourself doing a full blown adult novel? I feel like you have one in you.
I may very well have one in me. I don't. It always just, the idea comes to me. I start thinking about something and writing, and I figure out in the process of writing what kind of a book it is. And I never set out really thinking, well, today I'm going to try to write a picture book, or I should really be working on a middle grade novel or a YA novel. It's just, I write something, and sometimes it's actually the publisher who tells me what it is. So, one of these days, it may very well be that I have something that I write that it really just isn't even a YA novel. It's, for whatever reason, it's understood to be a full blown, adult fiction. And if that happens, then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it and see if anybody actually wants to publish it.
Well, that's interesting though. So you've had books where you've written it with one thing in mind, and then you've been told by the publisher that it's something else.
Well, not a lot of instances of that, but I would say that I wrote something. I'm actually kind of wrapping it up now, so I don't know when it's going to be published. But during the course of writing it, I realized it could be a middle grade novel, which I understand to be something that's in like the 8 to 12 or 9 to 13. It's sort of the Percy Jackson kind of a span of reading level, or YA, which would be anything really higher than that. And I didn't know which one it was. It was, it could very well have been a sort of like young YA or kind of sophisticated middle grade. And I almost needed my editor to tell me which way she wanted it to go, so that during my next draft, I kind of pushed it a little farther into the YA direction, because that's what she thought would serve it best. But
I see.
that's probably the best example in my career of something where, when I was writing it, I honestly didn't know. If you had told me to sort of push it a little farther into the middle grade direction, it wouldn't have ended up that much different. It just, the vocabulary would have been a little less dense. Maybe I would not have gotten into a couple of the headier, more philosophical areas that I got into in the writing of it. But it would have been pretty subtle shades between the middle grade version of it and the YA version of it.
Well, I appreciate the time, and I have to say, for the record, now that Time Spiral Remastered is out, you are back in heavy rotation. So my plea
Good.
to you is maybe just a couple more magic cards down the line, if there's any chance. I don't know if there is, but please do some, because Your artwork is sorely missed.
I'm not sure what's coming out soon, but I actually have done a couple in the last year. Um,
Nice.
so I don't really keep up with it enough to know what the schedule is. I just know that I did one of them kind of a long time ago, so I expect it to show up, and I did another one more recently. Um, so they're coming. You know, I don't have. I've been trying to just say yes to more things lately, and they, came at me with a couple of fun ideas at just the right time when it was easy for me to just kind of squeak something in between. There's a lot of dead time in publishing where you're just waiting for your editor to get back to you with comments on something, and you can't really work on your one project because you're waiting for your editor's comments, and you can't work on another project because you're waiting for your art director's comments. And you know that's the time where if somebody hits me with the right request, then I'm happy to jump back in with both feet.
Yeah, because with what they're doing with secret layers, I mean, you honestly could even do a magic card, feasibly do a magic card where it features innocent style drawings, as opposed to the way it was at the beginning, which it had to be sort of like almost look like medieval and things like that. There's so much room for creative out, outlets now.
That's how they got me actually with what was it, the Lorwyn cycle.
Hmm.
I thought I was out at that point. I really wasn't doing magic cards anymore. I had enough on my plate with which is writing and illustrating stuff. And I had been telling them for a while that like I really appreciate being able to do all these over the years. It was fun work, but this is kind of more what I'm doing now. So if you ever have stuff that's a little bit gentler, a little bit more The Hobbit and less World of Warcraft, then that would be something I would be interested in. But I said that fully expecting that would never actually happen. And then they come up with a set that really was, a little bit more of a storybook feel to it. And it's
Hmm.
like, oh, you got me. Okay, you called my bluff. So I guess I better do some. And
And yeah, and then you got a chance to show off your whimsical side.
yeah,
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much again. It was great talking to you.
yeah, you too. Thanks a lot.
How awesome is Adam? And on top of it, he's humble too. The only person I know more humble than him is me. My humility knows no bounds. One might say boundless even. And one might be right. I wonder when Neil Gaiman is gonna call me. I wrote my number on the dozens of letters I sent him, his manager, his publicist, his former college roommate. I should have asked Adam about that. Damn. Oh well, it's only a matter of time, I suppose. And speaking of time, it's time for me to say goodnight. So until next time, I, the very humble and brave Alper Markov, got a scoop.